The world is closely watching Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea, his first in 24 years. Amid rising global concerns about increasing military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow, the Kremlin has announced that Putin and Kim Jong-un are expected to sign important documents, likely including a treaty on a comprehensive strategic partnership. On the eve of his visit, Putin contributed an article to the North's Rodong Sinmun stating that Russia and North Korea will develop alternative systems for trade and mutual settlements not strained by Western countries and jointly oppose their illegitimate restrictive measures. What results will the highly anticipated Kim-Putin summit yield, and what might Putin offer to his old friend? For some clues, we connect to Lim Eun-jung, Associate Professor of International Studies at Kongju National University. It's always great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us tonight is Brian Myers, Professor of International Studies at Kongju University. Always great to see you.
It's great to be here.
All right, let's kick things off with you, Professor Myers. This marks President Putin's first visit to North Korea in 24 years. We'll discuss the details as we move on, but first tell us about the overall significance of Putin's trip to Pyongyang.
Well, it's very significant for many reasons. These are two quite mysterious leaders of nuclear-armed countries, which rightly or wrongly are perceived as being hostile to the West. So the ways in which they plan to cooperate could have really important consequences for world security and for the international order, which is now dominated by the US and China. And that's why the world, I think, is much more curious about this summit than about, say, the G7, where everyone knows exactly what the multilateral relationship is like. Now, leaders tend to be quite wary of summits because they don't want to make unwise concessions on the spur of the moment. I've heard the soccer metaphor that if you drop or miss the ball at a summit, the goal line is open behind you. So although the Kremlin is talking about a full day of negotiations, the leaders prefer to work out the joint statement well before the summit begins. And that seems to have happened here. As you reported earlier in the hour, a comprehensive security agreement is likely to be announced. We're not going to get exact details about what that entails, but Putin's rhetoric in the North Korean newspaper about opposing America's ambitions was pretty strong. And we know that Putin also plans a visit to an Orthodox church in Pyongyang. So that shows there are going to be other aspects to the summit than just security-related ones. I expect an economic dimension as well, considering North Korea's economic woes and Putin's remarks about defying international sanctions.
Well, Putin's first visit in more than 2 decades will undoubtedly strengthen the anti-West alignment and further cement the burgeoning military and economic partnership between North Korea and Russia. It'll also be a chance for Putin to reestablish himself on the global stage to show the world that he has his partners. Now, Professor Lim, Putin's visit is a reciprocal one following Kim Jong-un's week-long trip to Russia just 9 months ago. While some believe Putin's visit came in a rather hurried manner, what's your take?
Well, I only partially agree with that wording, again, in a hurry. The reason why I say so is, again, President Putin of Russia, it seems like he is now resuming his those diplomatic actions with friendly countries. Like, for example, last month, right after he was re-inaugurated, his 5th term started, and then he visited China, for example, or Belarus. Or Uzbekistan. Again, my President Yoon Suk-yeol, also just visited the country, Uzbekistan. And then now he's visiting Pyongyang. And after his probably 1 day or little less than the 1 day trip to North Korea, it is known that, again, the President Putin is going to the Vietnam, which, again, to me, it looks like, he's doing what he's trying to do. Again, he's resuming his all these diplomatic events amid a kind of, isolation in the international society. So far, I think it's a part of his organized and scheduled diplomatic events. And as you just highlighted, again, absolutely, it is a response, answer to the Kim Jong-un's visit last year.
Well, experts, it looks like they're divided on this. Some say this shows how desperate Putin is for weapons aid for Russia's fight against Ukraine amid global isolation, while others argue that Putin now has more room, if you will, to make overseas trips after his re-election and as Russia is making advancements in Ukraine. But either way, Professor Myers, concerns are rising that Putin and Kim may sign a new military treaty close to the level of the past alliance treaty between North Korea and then Soviet Union, which included a clause on automatic military intervention in contingencies. How do you see the possibility?
Well, the security relationship is going to deepen, certainly. The North Koreans are going to supply more to the Russian war effort, and Russia is going to reciprocate with weapons and technology. And we're going to see a comprehensive strategic partnership. But I'd be very surprised to see the two countries return to the old Cold War type relationship. For one thing, Russia is in a war right now. So naturally, Kim is going to think twice about becoming a full-fledged ally of Russia. Also, while both countries are now on very bad terms with the United States, Russia even more so than North Korea, I think both Putin and Kim are looking perhaps past the Ukraine war. They're looking ahead to the strong possibility of an isolationist and NATO skeptic returning to the White House. And that might lead to a peace initiative from Washington. But if North Korea enters a Ukraine conflict that in turn draws in NATO troops, or if Russia commits itself to defending Kim's nuclear sites against an American strike, I think that would make it difficult even for Trump to hold out an olive branch to either regime. And conversely, if Putin and Kim maintain a certain distance from each other, they both stand to gain some amount of goodwill from a future American administration. You know, there are quite a few people in the US State Department who dream of a kind of two Korea policy, with Kim Jong-un lured away from China and Russia, or at least coaxed into neutrality. And Kim is, of course, aware of this. So I think they have too much to lose from an outright alliance at this point.
So we are likely to see an elevated military partnership between North Korea and Russia, but it's unlikely, and you'd be very surprised if the two countries will restore alliance-level treaty that involves military intervention. And I think you highlighted a very important point there. One very obvious reason. Kim would have to think twice. Russia is actually, in fact, at war right now against Ukraine. And staying with you, Professor Myers, amid growing military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, eyes are also fixed on how far Russia would go in the transfer of advanced nuclear and missile technologies. What sort of gift would Putin hand over to his old friend?
Well, let me just say here that Putin is not Donald Trump, as Kim has probably found out, and he's probably not thinking in terms of an old friendship. Putin is not a spontaneous, emotional man who looks at international relations in that kind of way. I think he's a guy who's going to keep a very clear vision of Russia's interests, not just now, but in the long term. Now, considering Russia is arguably the world leader in nuclear and missile technology, there's no end to the kind of gifts that North Korea would like to get from Putin. South Korean experts have said that Kim is especially interested in getting the assistance needed to build a nuclear submarine, for example. But I don't see Putin wanting any more nuclear and naval competition in the Pacific than he's already getting from China and the US. And I can't see him handing over any really big high-tech prizes in return for ammunition and mortar shells and things like that. I would expect high-tech cooperation, which North Korea can utilize to military ends, but which is not necessarily military. For example, the supply of technology relevant to liquid oxygen propellants.
So perhaps Putin will help Kim Jong-un with North Korea's nascent satellite program, but won't go much further than that, factoring in Russia's various other national interests. Many North Korea experts here in Seoul also agree that there is little possibility of Russia transferring sensitive advanced military technologies involving the ICBM or nuclear-powered submarines. Now, Professor Lim, the two leaders are also expected to focus heavily on expanding economic cooperation. What key areas will be under the spotlight?
Well, North Korea, if we just take a look back into its behavior over the decades and decades, again, North Korea has been pretty elusive and pretty clever enough to play with the two big gigantic neighbors, again, the China and Russia, then Soviet. They have been playing with these two, again, the giant all the time. So this time, again, right after Russia invaded the Ukraine, even right after the war erupted, again, the North Korea this time chose the Russia as a strategic partner, and it has been consistently supporting the Russia's position in the UN or in wherever they are. So through that kind of, again, the strategic choice, North Korea is absolutely trying to expand its strategic room. It has been too probably dependent on China, which was, I think, regarded as one of the kind of limitations or weakness of themselves. So now, again, they are again trying to expand more like economic or even technological cooperation with the other, again, the Russia. So this time, of course, the details will be coming out, but the personnel who are traveling together with the President Putin, if you take a look into the list of the participants, again, of course, we do see the defense minister and foreign minister, they should be there. But in addition to them, for example, space-related personnel or like a railroad or energy or even public health-related key personnel, they traveling together. It indicates that, I think, again, as the other panelist, Professor Meyer already pointed out very well, as it looks like, again, the two countries are, and probably, again, the North Korea more, they want more those kind of more socio-economic support from, again, the Russia this time. So, well, we'll see. The results will be coming out, but it looks like North Korea is definitely interested in those more like a comprehensive socio-economic cooperation with the Russia, which is very natural resource rich and technologically speaking, of course, advanced country in the world.
So the two leaders are expected to deepen cooperation in quite a few economic domains, but of course not all of their agreements will be unveiled, of course, due to the existing global sanctions on both North Korea and Russia. And Dr. Lim, Putin's visit is anticipated to make a big splash in the region. How do you assess its impact on regional affairs in the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, the so-called restructuring or realignment of power has already begun, actually. U.S.-China strategic rivalry, which is usually described as a small yard and high fence, which means in very specific key future technologies area, these two countries are very much intensively competing one another. So U.S.-China strategic rivalry is already there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, again, Russia invaded the Ukraine, the other sovereign state, which really undermines the stability and the security in the Europe. So gradually, those security of European continent or the European countries became intertwined, interconnected with the security issues of the Pacific, in Indo-Pacific country. Indo-Pacific regions. So that is why the NATO's Secretary General, who just visiting the Washington D.C., he also mentioned that this the summit between the Putin and Kim can be a really can be a kind of game changer to the even the security situations of Europe, because again, as long as for example, those bomb shells, artillery shells, will be continuously provided by North to the Russia. Again, it can hurt Ukraine, and it can hurt the security of the European countries and so on. So again, my point is these two very different regions. It used to be pretty much distant physically and strategically too. However, now it really became interconnected. It's hard to separate the security of Europe from the security of Indo-Pacific regions. And of course, this specific bilateral summit is not the only reason for all the things, but certainly the summit can be an accelerator, which is unfortunate, I'll say.
Professor Myers, President Putin, before his trip to North Korea, said that he highly appreciates South Korea's position not to directly supply weapons to Ukraine and that Moscow is ready to restore relations with Seoul. Why do you think these remarks were made at this particular time?
Yeah, those were really important remarks, which I'm sure Kim Jong-un was not happy about, because they make quite clear that Russia is not ready to sacrifice a good relationship with Seoul in order to become an outright ally of North Korea's, or at least not yet. As Professor Lim was saying, North Korea has a history of trying to play off China against Russia or the Soviet Union, and I'm sure Putin remembers this. At the same time, of course, those remarks of Putin's are a coded warning to President Yoon not to begin supplying weapons to Ukraine, but instead to keep a certain distance from Washington in regard to that conflict. As for why those remarks were made at that particular time, I'm not sure, but Moscow may have wanted to forestall some sort of commitment or public statement that it had reason to suspect the Yoon government was planning to make, or perhaps a delivery which a South Korean weapons manufacturer was planning to make. In any case, I think it might be in South Korea's interests to ponder those remarks, to take them to heart, and to play more of a middle power role, let's say, in regard to Ukraine than it has played so far, because sometimes it pays for smaller countries to stay on the sidelines.
South Korea, meanwhile, held the inaugural 2+2 defense dialogue with China this afternoon. Dr. Lim, is this part of China's efforts to distance itself from the growing Pyongyang-Moscow military ties? What sort of message would it send to the North?
Well, China's position is pretty much ambivalent, of course, historically or ideologically, or from a perspective of this regime type. Again, that China cannot probably reject all this importance of the partnership with Russia and with North Korea. We do, somewhat understand this China's that kind of, difficult position. However, at the same time, through the very recent latest trilateral summit, Korea-Japan-China summit, again, this 2+2 meeting was decided. And, this is very, how would you say, very much important and meaningful decision, because Korea has had this 2+2 meetings with the United States. Of course, it is the alliance for us, but with Australia, for example. But China, again, as one of the most important strategic partner for the Korea as well, South Korea as well. Again, this time we started up this 2+2 meetings, and China also, I do think China also understands, the situation, and that they don't want to be, I don't think that they want to be just one of the so-called new Cold War, the other team, because China is another like a huge trading country, and they definitely should and needs to be connected with the rest of the world, economically or culturally or even socially as well. So as long as China's interest cannot be the same or with the North Korea-like country, Hermit Kingdom-like country, again, China wants to, I think, be more cooperative with the South Korea for maintaining the stability and the peace in the region as well.
It looks like China is making efforts to strike that delicate diplomatic balance. But how should South Korea navigate through the current diplomatic complexities surrounding the Korean Peninsula?
It's a very difficult time, again, for South Korea-like country. Again, we are a peace-loving country, and at the same time, we are one of the largest trading country in the world. So when the whole global economy is open to one another, that's the best time for us. And then when the rules are well kept, maintained, again, that's the best time for us. But totally, today's world is very different from the world where South Korea was able to become more prosperous. Which is, of course, a very sad thing to South Korea-like country. However, at the same time, I think we do have many those diplomatic resources. Again, the Korea is, as just Professor Meyer mentioned, is a middle power, but this current government is trying to pursue so-called global pivotal state, which means we want to strengthen, expand our network power to even with the global South countries. Again, my president just visited Central Asia, or we did have the summit within African countries as well. We want, and I think we can have understandings and sympathy from so many countries in other continents, including, again, Africa or even Latin America too. So as long as, again, the South Korea has so many those diplomatic resources, I think we should maximize to use the resources we have.
All right, we'll leave it there, but we'll continue to keep close tabs on the significant diplomatic events unfolding right here on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you, as always, Professor Lim, for your insights.
Thank you.
And many thanks to you as well, Dr. Myers, for your brilliant analysis.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.